Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming on nice and early. You might hear some noises behind me. We have a school in-person tour who is just getting on their buses, so don't mind the noise. We're going to get started right at 1 o'clock, so y'all still have a few minutes to kind of settle in, so no rush. And this is being recorded, so if you do have to get going for some reason, that's okay. I will be putting this on the California State Parks Ports YouTube channel, so it can be available for later. And also, honestly, you can find Bits and Pieces program in the California State Park Ports webpage as well, and YouTube channel. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, and I'll tell you how we're going to do this kind of program, so just hang on tight. I don't want to ding the people who happen to not be here early, okay? All right, we're going to get started in just one more minute. Okay, so according to my clock, it is just now 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to Calaveras Big Trees State Park. I want to launch a poll here, but I'll be waiting for the last few people might be a little late, and that's okay. Have you ever been to Calaveras Big Trees State Park before? So I want you to vote either yep, nope, virtually, like maybe you visited before in a different kind of program, similar to this one, or maybe. I know for me, I don't always remember all the places I visited, so I'm perfectly okay if you put maybe on there. But please go ahead and vote. I do like using polls for these kinds of webinars, so you can kind of see what everyone else is thinking. And if you can't vote, that's okay. Maybe you can ask someone to vote for you, all right? And if we end up not being able to vote, it's not working for one of the classes, I'll just do fewer polls, all right? So we'll let that run for a few minutes. Put in your opinions. And hopefully at that point, we have pretty much everyone who is going to participate today. And if you are a class, I do want to say, feel free to vote for the majority. So if the majority says no, go ahead and put in no for the majority. I'll give you another 2 minutes to answer the poll. So please vote if you have not yet. Also, I see a number of you raising your hands. I am not going to be using the raised hand function. That being said, feel free to do the other reactions that you can see floating across your screen. I will be asking you to kind of react to a couple different things I'm saying. So feel free to react, but I'm not going to be paying attention to any raised hands, okay? And I will not be looking at the Q&A until the very end of the program. So I will be ignoring the questions you put in there for now, because there is a high likelihood that I'll be answering your question later on. So we're going to be going to Q&A at the end. Give you another 30 seconds if you haven't voted in the poll yet to do so. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And as you can see, which kind of makes sense, the majority of you have never been here before, so welcome. A couple of you have been here virtually and have been here before in person, so welcome back. And then another couple of you are saying maybe. Now, if your vote was represented, just know that at least I'm getting kind of a sense for what the majority is saying, right? So today we're going to be talking all about giant sequoias. This is the giant sequoia PORTScast. And as I told you all, some of you I think are coming in after I mentioned, we will be using the reaction button, but not the raised hand feature. So feel free to give me reactions all along the program. I don't mind that at all. We'll be using polls like that one occasionally, and I will be checking the Q&A at the very end. So if you want to make sure your question is answered, wait until the end. I'm more likely to see it if you ask it near the end versus in the beginning, okay? And how I do this program, I will be asking you questions. Sometimes I'll be asking you to discuss as a class. Sometimes I'll ask you to do it in the poll. Sometimes I'll ask you to do it in the reactions. So please stay with me this whole program and we'll learn about the giant sequoias all together. Now that that's all out of the way, I want to give you more of an introduction to where I am. For those of you who said MOPE, I wouldn't be surprised if you've never even heard of Calaveras Big Tree State Park before, and that's okay. We are a state park in California, so we have to be within the state, right? That just kind of makes sense. And because it's a state park, that means it is your park too. If you're a California resident, if you're not, you're still very welcome to come visit here. But California is a huge state. So as you can see, I have big trees on the Google map. And as I'm zooming out, maybe you're recognizing a couple things here. Sacramento. And now we're zoomed all the way out. You can see the whole state very clearly. And you can tell I'm kind of in the middle of the state. Not like smack dab in the middle, but kind of close, maybe a bit more northern. And I'm also not super close to the ocean. I'm not along the coast. I'm more inland. And I'm close enough to the border of Nevada to mean that I am in what's called the like midpoint of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now way at the most top, but I'm at about 5,000 feet or so. And I'm on the western slope, so side closer to the ocean. All that means I am in perfect habitat for the giant sequoia. This is a very, very picky tree. It is only found in the western slope in the midpoint of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And that's it, at least naturally. People have taken giant sequoias and planted them elsewhere, but naturally they're only found within roughly this squiggle right here. That's it. In the whole wide world, it's only that little strip. So if you can kind of place yourself on this map here, you can maybe see how close or far you might be from a giant sequoia. But in general, if you're living out in California, you're a lot closer to one of these than people from all over the world. So we're very, very lucky to have these trees because they're really cool. I mean, I'm doing an entire program about them. They have to be pretty cool. You might have guessed, based off of the name Calaveras Big Tree State Park and off of giant sequoia, these are the biggest individual trees ever. Now by big, we're talking they're really wide, they're really tall, and they're very heavy. You have to consider all of those factors before you can get the claim to fame as the biggest whatever ever, at least when it has to do with nature. So I'm not going to get all the way up to this tree because you can just see it says fragile area. We have this area gated off, fenced off, because unfortunately people are starting to climb on top of this giant sequoia and starting to damage it. And so we had to put up this fence to make sure it didn't get damaged anymore. So I'm going to respect the fence, just like you should always respect the fence. But you can see behind me, it's quite big. We're going to do a little bit of math to give you more of a sense for how huge these trees can be. So my wingspan is about 5 feet. Now, I want you to do some quick math in your head here and maybe talk about it within your class if you know. How many of me would it take to stretch across a 40-foot tree? That's about the max a giant sequoia is at this point. So I agree here not distract you too much. What is 8 into 40? Hopefully some of you came up with the answer 8. That is indeed correct. It would take 8 of me to stretch across my arms to get to be the widest giant sequoia ever. But we have to consider the other factors too, right? We have to consider the height as well. Now, the way the sun is, it might get a little glary for you, so hopefully you can see the top of this tree with me. I'm very limited with where my Wi-Fi connectivity is. But we're starting down at the bottom of the tree, and now we're going to go all the way to the top. Okay? I mean, you can see all these other trees around the giant sequoia, but they're nowhere near as big or as tall. Giant sequoias are the tallest trees in the forests they live in. Their number one goal is to start out as a seed, is to get past all the other trees in the forest. Once they've done that, they have the sun all to themselves. They're kind of sun greedy. They stop growing taller. That could be at 250, 275. The max is about 300 feet up. And then they grow wider after that. Number one goal, grow tall. Once they do that, just like how we stop growing taller, they're good, but then they can keep growing wide. So if you have something that's really wide and it's really tall, it just makes sense, especially if it's a tree, that's going to be very heavy as well. The heaviest giant sequoias, if you just consider the trunk of the tree, the middle part of the tree, not including the branches, can weigh more than 1,000 tons. And 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So if you want to do a little bit of math there, that means these trees are millions of pounds. They're very large, very heavy, biggest individual trees ever, right? But I don't want to just give you fun facts. I want us to think about these things kind of critically. So, question for you all to discuss as a class or within whatever groups you're in. What do plants need to grow? We need to figure that out first before we figure out what makes a giant sequoia so special. So I'll give you a few moments to discuss that amongst yourselves. All right, so hopefully you've come up with a few examples. Usually one of the first ones people bring up is water, right? That's very key. They need the sun. I kind of already told you that. I said giant sequoias are a bit greedy about the sun. They need air, specifically the air we breathe out, so carbon dioxide. They take in the carbon dioxide we breathe out. They give out oxygen, which is what we breathe in. So it's a very beneficial relationship, you know? We kind of need plants. And those three key ingredients, carbon dioxide, water, and sun, are what's required for photosynthesis. Maybe you've heard of that before. It's what plants do to make their own food. They use those three key ingredients, go through photosynthesis, like having this big old bake-off in a kitchen, and then they make their food. Now, besides that, they do need some good soil to anchor into to get some nutrients out of. And within that soil, they need a lot of space, right? If you're going to get to be this big, you have to have enough space to do so. If the giant sequoia seed landed somewhere where there's a ton of trees, like maybe somewhere back here, it can't get this big. There's just not enough room for it. So for giant sequoia in particular, it needs a lot of sun and it needs a lot of space. Other plants might do okay without those. But they do have a secret ingredient, and that's time. Now we all need time to grow. Let's take a quick raise hands. Raise your hands if you celebrate your birthday every year. I'm guessing a lot of people celebrate their birthday every year, right? Yeah, I do too. That's why my hand's raised. Well, if giant sequoias were to celebrate their birthday every year, there would be quite a lot of celebrations because they can live over 3,200 years. So that means the very oldest giant sequoia germinated. That's just a very fancy way of saying started growing from its seed during the end of the ancient Egyptian Empire. So when the pharaohs were losing their grip over Egypt, this one tree got its start in life, was a seedling reaching up towards the sun. And I mentioned that they don't grow tall after a certain point. They kind of cap off. They don't stop growing wider the whole time they're alive, as long as they have everything they need. If it's a drought year, there's not enough water, they're not going to grow. But if they have everything okay, they will keep growing and growing and growing. And if you can keep growing during the entirety of the Roman Empire and the Vikings and the Renaissance era, when the Mona Lisa was painted and the sculptures were carved, then you're going to be a really huge tree, right? We could do that. We'd be one of the biggest living things ever. But we can't, and they can, and that's why they can get the record. So that's cool. That explains how they got to be so big. But it doesn't explain how they can live so long, right? It just brings up a brand new question. So now I need to answer that. And its survival for that long has to do entirely with adaptation. Now, what I want you to do is use your reaction button. Give me a thumbs up if you've heard of adaptation or pretty comfortable with it. Give me a thumbs up reaction if you know about adaptations. All right, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. Excellent. I will still talk about it, but it's good to see all the thumbs up that you all have talked about it before in some way, shape, or form. So an adaptation is any sort of characteristic or trait like our thumbs. Go ahead and wiggle your thumbs for each other. You can give yourselves a thumbs up if you want to as well, but go ahead and just wiggle your thumbs. And it's okay if you don't have them, but most people have thumbs, and thumbs help us grab tools, use things, construct buildings, and that helps us live almost wherever we want. So it can be physical, like our thumbs. It can be a permanent physical thing. It can be a behavior. Like one really popular or really well-known, I should say, adaptation are how the butterflies migrate. They move away from the wintertime. Birds and whales do that too. It could be something that's temporary, something that's permanent, but it always has to do with surviving in their environment. Or if it's migration, like getting away from the environment, going somewhere nicer. So for giant sequoia, it has to survive in these mountain areas and needs to survive other things potentially killing it. And its main adaptation is the bark. Now I got a little sample of bark in my pocket here that I shall reveal. It's a nice up close look at the bark of a giant sequoia. Now the bark of the tree, well, I should back up a little bit. Bark is on the very outermost layer of every tree. It always protects them. The bark of a giant sequoia is unique. It has this nice reddish color. Yeah. Maybe you've heard of coast redwoods. Those are the tallest trees ever. The giant sequoia is a very close relative of the coast redwood. They're basically siblings. They're directly related to each other. They both have this reddish bark. And this red comes from a group of chemicals called tannins. That's Tannins, tannins. Tannins taste super bitter. So show of hands for yourself in your classrooms. Who here likes dark chocolate? Raise your hands if you like dark chocolate. And if you want to give me a reaction like dark chocolate, that works too. Now give me a reaction and raise your hands if you like milk chocolate over dark chocolate. You much prefer that flavor. All right, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up for that one too. So if you're a fan of the dark chocolate, you like the tannins. If you're a fan of the milk chocolate, you don't like it as much. Tannins are what give dark chocolate its really bitter flavor. And sometimes you kind of have to adapt to it. You kind of have to work your way towards the dark chocolate. Insects also have taste buds, and they don't like this bitter tree. They want to chew on a tree that doesn't taste nearly as bad. Like maybe one of these trees over here. They're not reddish, so that means they don't have the tannins and they taste okay. Now, in general, if just a few bugs are chewing away on a tree, it's okay. But the main issue is when a ton of them are eating a tree, like the bark beetle, that could be a big problem. That happens to other trees that might live in this kind of forest. Doesn't happen nearly as often for giant sequoias. There is a bark beetle called the cedar bark beetle that just recently scientists have noticed them hanging out in giant sequoias. But so far, we haven't seen any giant sequoias just outright suffer and die from those. So far, they're doing okay, which is good. The tannins are still doing their thing. And here's the thing, tannins have another superpower. Not only do they repel bugs, but diseases don't like tannins. The disease basically like disintegrates if it tries to attack a tree that has tannins in it. We don't always think about plants with disease, but they can definitely get diseases, definitely suffer from them. Hardly ever happens for giant sequoias. Tannins also get rid of or push away, I should say. They don't get rid of, but push away fungi. So we're talking like mushrooms. Some fungi are good for trees. Some fungi are bad. Very few bad fungi attack giant sequoias because of those tannins. So it's a really powerful adaptation, really powerful characteristic of these trees so they can live so long. Now, they do have another adaptation that's also very impressive that has to do with their bark. At the thickest point, which is down low near the bottom of the tree, the bark of a giant sequoia can be 2 feet thick. Okay? That's the length of my arm. Now I mentioned the bark of the tree protects the tree all over, and all trees have basically the skin of the tree. So don't hurt yourself, but go ahead and give yourself just a little pinch. Okay? Just a little one. So you can feel your skin. Your skin's pretty thin, but it does do a pretty good job protecting you. You might get a cut occasionally, maybe accidentally burn yourself, but it does a pretty good job. Imagine if your skin was 2 feet thick. It would be really hard to have anything get through all that and give you like a paper cut or something. And that's the same idea for the giant sequoia. Having bark that thick, it's just really hard to get past the bark, get to the part of the tree is most important, which is a bit directly beneath the bark, and then damage it. It is possible though. It's possible when it comes to fire. Fire is not very likely to burn the whole 2 feet. If you ever tossed a log into a fire, you know 2 feet's a lot of wood to burn, but it is possible. Giant sequoias, though, can survive a really hot, intense fire that does burn through all of it. Now, they can't usually survive if the fire climbs to the very topmost part of the tree. That's a no-go. But the fire stays down low. Even if it's really hot and intense, giant sequoias probably will be okay. Now, this tree is called a chimney tree. It's in part of the park that there is no conductivity at all. But as you can tell, you can see all the way through it going this way. If you stand in the middle and look up, you can see the sky. This is from a burn from we don't know how long ago. I'm going to let this video slowly pan up. I apologize if it's jerky on your end. My connectivity is moderate today. But I will pause at the very top so you can see the living branches of the tree. Okay, so we have these and these. Nice and bushy. You can kind of tell with the lighting, they're a good green color. That's what we're looking for. It's doing okay, even with a burn that big. Now, the middle of the tree that makes it hollow is lost forever. Trees can't grow back their middle, and that's okay. It's only really there for structural support. This tree is more likely to fall over from like a windstorm, but overall it's okay. And it is slowly starting to heal the rest of the tree. Again, that bit directly beneath the bark. That's the bit that makes the tree get wider and wider. The lighter tan bit I just circled, that's it slowly growing over its wound, what we call the burn scar. And eventually, given enough time and given that this tree has enough like resources, it will seal over completely and we wouldn't know this tree was hollow. Not until eventually it fell over because it just couldn't handle it anymore. So they're very, very impressive. They can survive all sorts of different things. But so far, I've been talking about just how they can live so long. It's also really important to consider how they need to survive as a seed and competing with all the other plants here. And of course, interacting with the animals. So I'm gonna turn the camera around and I'm gonna give you a very brief little walking tour of this area I'm around right now. Again, I can't go very far because I have limited connectivity. I'm gonna show you some of the plants that live with the giant sequoia. I'll tell you a little bit about the animals. If we see some animals, that'd be cool, but don't know if we're going to, so don't hold your breath. But most of the trees we have here, just like the giant sequoia, are conifer trees. They have needles. You can see this tree's needles right now. It's just their version of a leaf. And usually conifers are evergreen. So this green you're seeing in this tree right now stays year round, doesn't really turn fall colors. Same goes for the giant sequoia. Conifers also have cones. That's where they carry the seeds of their tree, just like a fruit. And again, majority of the trees we have here are those conifers. You can see all these tall green things here. We do have some of these kinds of plants though. These are dogwood, but they're the opposite of conifers. They have nice big broad leaves. So they're a broadleaf kind of plant. They don't get very big, so people call them both a shrub and a tree. And they do turn colors in the fall and lose their leaves. So they're deciduous. We get a little bit of fall color here in this park. And you can actually see some fall color right now because it's the end of December, right? Starting to get to that time of year. Now we have a variety of animals here as well, and they rely on all these plants I'm showing you. We have lots of squirrels. Those are the ones you might see over the camera. We have a variety of birds like woodpeckers. The lighting isn't perfect this time of day, but there's some holes in this tree here, and maybe you can kind of see. Those are caused by woodpeckers looking for insects inside this tree. We have owls, we have snakes, we have frogs, deer, and black bears. Those are usually the animal people are most excited to see or potentially most concerned about seeing. Kind of depends on your point of view. And again, I'll call this park home and I'll have some sort of relationship with the trees, especially with their seeds and cones. So we're gonna play a bit of a game right now. I'm going to show you 4 different cones from 4 different kinds of conifers we have here. So again, the trees that have needles like this one. I'm gonna show them to you all first, and then I'm gonna launch a poll. I want you all to vote for which one you think came from the giant sequoia. So give me a thumbs up reaction. Does that sound good to you? All right, I'm seeing a string of thumbs up. Perfect. So we have the first cone. Again, carries the seeds of the tree. Cone number 1. It is pretty prickly. These are like little thorns right here. Okay. We have cone number 2. definitely smaller than number 1. Nice and smooth though. It kind of looks like a pineapple. Some people have said that, but there's like no spikes. You could play catch with it if you wanted to. All right, number 2. We have cone number 3. All right. Even smaller. Looks like a W or maybe a trident or something. All right. And then we have the very last cone. We have cone number 4. Okay. So now is when I'm going to launch the poll. And again, teachers, if you're in a big old classroom, just give me the majority vote. So I'm going to launch the poll here. Please go ahead and vote in the poll. And if I notice that not a lot of you can vote, I'll do another session where I show them to you and I'll ask you for specific reactions. But the poll is just a nice, easy way to see the distribution, to see what everyone's voting for. So of course you can vote for 1, 2, 3, or 4 for which one is the giant sequoia cone. Okay, I'm not seeing a ton of votes with the poll, and that's okay. Let's use the reaction buttons to see what everyone else is saying too, okay? So use the heart emoji, please, if you think cone number 1 is a giant sequoia cone. I'll give you a couple moments to kind of adjust for it, but heart if you think it's cone number 1. All right, I'm seeing some hearts. I'm also seeing some not hearts, so I feel like some people are disagreeing here. How about a heart emoji if you think it's number 2? Who thinks it's number 2? All right, I'm not seeing too many. I'm seeing other kinds of reactions. I'm seeing some though. Maybe roughly the same as number 1. All right, all right. How about number 3? Give me a heart emoji if you think it's number 3. And if you do want to vote in the poll as well, it's okay. You can do both. I just want to get a general reaction, right? Not a ton for number 3, maybe about the same as 1 and 2, okay? I have a feeling we're gonna get a big majority here. Give me a heart emoji if it's number 4. If you think number 4 is a giant sequoia cone. All right, yes, I'm seeing a lot more hearts than I did for the first 3. Okay, feel free to keep reacting if you'd like. I'm going to officially end the poll and end my emoji poll. And I mean, y'all kind of all agreed, whether you did the poll or you did the emotions. It was an even split 1, 2, and 3 with very few people voting for those. And the big majority is voting for cone number 4. So I would like you please to give me a drum roll for the grand reveal of which cone is the giant sequoia cone. The real giant sequoia cone is number 2. So give me a wow reaction if this surprised you. Give me the surprised face if this is surprising to you. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of those. This is the cone that carries the seeds of the biggest tree ever. Look at the size difference between these two. Pretty wild, right? But there is a reason behind this, and it has to do with that survival and taking advantage of the animals here of the seed. Okay, so we'll get to these, I promise. But first, I don't want to not tell you what these other cones are. This is the ponderosa pine cone, and it's prickly. So prickly ponderosa is a good way to remember it. And all cones function in a similar way. Each of these has a little pricks on it. It's called a scale. Scales start out green. The whole cone starts out green. scales are faced upright. They dry out, crank open, and then the seeds come out. Now, sometimes the animals will eat the cone, but not the whole thing. I like to consider it similar to corn on the cob. So instead of them cranking open and staying nice and cool looking like that, they'll actually look like this. They will take away the scales and eat the delicious seeds inside and leave the middle. Just like how you might need to take away the husk of the corn, eat the kernels inside, and then leave the cob behind, right? Same idea. And this is a good reason why we want you to leave the cones you find in the forest like this one in the forest. Because you're taking away not only the seeds that could grow into a tree, but a good food source for the animals like those birds and squirrels. We don't want that to happen. So leave the cones you find in the forest where you found them for the most part. If you pick them up, move them slightly, it's okay. So that's cone number 1. We also had cone number 3, of course. This is the incense cedar cone. Now, only a handful of you voted for this one, but this is actually a distant relative of the giant sequoia. So if you vote for this, you vote for like its cousin. So give yourself like partial credit because you got within the family. And just like the other tree, starts out green, closed up like this, pops open, seeds come out. All right, enough of those two. Let's get to the interesting ones. No offense to them. This is the sugar pine cone. And that's sugar like the stuff inside of candy and fruit. And the sugar pine tree produces the longest cones of any conifer. So this does break records. It's also the biggest pine tree. It's not the biggest tree, of course, it's the giant sequoia, but it is a very big tree on its own. And because it's so big, you can clearly see scale, and this little divot here where it changes colors and changes look, that's where the seed hangs out. So that's a pretty big fat seed. Give me how about we do a laughing reaction? Give me a laughing reaction if you've ever eaten a pine nut or have had pesto sauce before. Give me a laughing reaction if you've ever eaten something like that. All right, I'm seeing some laughing reactions. Yeah, so you've had something very, very similar to a sugar pine seed. Basically the same thing. You know how good that tastes. Animals agree with you. They love this stuff. And not only that, but this is so big, this is an important food source. If you're a squirrel about half this size, and we have some pretty small squirrels here, this is enough food to last you for months. So we've seen animals fighting each other over getting one of these. And if you know anything about squirrels, and some other birds as well, they will bury this stuff and eat it later, but they don't always remember it. And that's how we can get some new sugar pine trees. And one of the theories why this is so big is because that makes it very, very appealing to animals. They will take this, they'll move it all over the forest, they'll bury it all over, protect it as much as they can, maybe eat some, but they'll definitely forget some, and ergo, sugar pines are pretty successful in this forest. Now, as you might have guessed, this is not the way giant sequoias do their thing. They're not all about the animals. There are some animals that chew around the outside of the cone, and that actually helps open them up and release their seeds. But that's not their number one goal. They're not looking for the animals to help them distribute their seeds. They are instead relying on the wind. I got some giant sequoia seeds in this little container right here. I'm gonna pour one out and show you how small they are. They want to be small and lightweight so they can easily spread with the wind. This is a baby giant sequoia. They start out this little, but again, small and lightweight, catch the wind. And remember, these cones, they're where the branches are. And the branches of giant sequoia are near the very tippy-most top of the tree. So might as well take advantage of all that aerospace they need to travel anyway and float through the air to land in a brand new spot and hopefully grow a pretty successful giant sequoia. Now I say hopefully because most giant sequoia seeds, I should say, will not be successful. They'll land somewhere, it's not great, and they won't do very well. but they can be strategic and they can release their seeds at specific time. Specifically, they will release their seeds after signs of smoke and heat, after signs of a wildfire. Think about it. After a fire goes through, if it's not too catastrophic, not too big, it'll burn away some of these plants, opening up some space and letting in more sun. Those are the two key things I told you before, right? The giant sequoias really like to have in order to be successful. So they don't mind fire, and they're adapted to at least those lower burning ones. The ones that reach the very tops of the trees that have been happening recently, those are not so good. They can't really survive those. And those really big fires are, for the most part, our fault. By our, I mean like people who have been in charge of the forest for quite some time. A whole lot of factors going into it, but one of them is climate change. Because climate change is increasing temperature. And if temperature is increasing, that means that overall, you're getting hotter areas. And if it's hotter, it's more likely to start a fire. Fuel gets dried out, it's more likely to catch, and it can be bad time. Now, we've had more fuel overall because we've been mismanaging forests, not actually allowing fires to happen to get rid of the fuel. But climate change is something you can help out with. I do not want you to help out with fuel reduction because that could be a bad thing. But you can help with climate change. So what I want you to do to help is to reduce your food waste. I'm going to back up a little bit and explain how that can help. So climate change is caused by people, corporations, everyone putting fossil fuels into the air by burning it. So like coal, gas, that kind of thing. It's increasing temperatures overall in the world, and that's a bad thing. So if you help reduce your food waste, then all the fuel that was burned transporting your food to wherever it was processed or made and is transporting it to wherever you ate it isn't for nothing. So if you can, eat the food you have, give it to someone else if you really don't like it, or if possible, compost it. So the very least, it makes some nice rich soil that maybe a farmer could use somewhere down the line. All right, so do this for yourself. It'll also help your folks out because that would mean it's like less food's wasted, so the money isn't wasted either. And maybe if you can start something at your schools, that could be really helpful too, to decrease your overall impact on the climate. So with that being said, I'm going to launch this poll here. And I also want you to give me a reaction. Give me a nice big heart if you're going to help out and do the best you can to decrease your food waste. All right. You might notice there's only 3 answers here. It's either yes, yes, or yes. So you can pick any one of those. That's okay with me. Lots of hearts too. I love it. All right. I'm going to let this poll go. I'm going to take us on a little bit of a walk where we're going to wrap up this program here. And I'm going to show you what was the biggest tree in this forest that unfortunately is now just a stump. So as we walk, you're going to see our maintenance crews working on this parking lot here. You might hear them as well. Don't mind them. But you're also going to end up starting to see that stump that was the biggest tree in this area. And we got to go back in time to explain the story of this stump. We got to go back to before 1852. Before then, the only people who knew about giant sequoias were the local tribes who lived there. So since giant sequoias are found across the Sierra Nevadas, I can't mention every single tribe, but our tribes of Miwok and Washoe, they lived amongst these trees. They knew about them. But then when the gold rush happened, starting in the late 1840s, more and more people started coming to the area, and eventually people came up to this location, and this was the very specific tree that got the whole world interested in giant sequoias. So it was labeled the discovery tree. Unfortunately, 1 year later, so 1853, this tree was cut down. And it was basically for money. And it wasn't for money like logging. It was for money to send the tree to places all over the world. Think about it. We're talking 1850s. Really hard to get to California. if you're not already here. Really hard to have pictures happen. It was still a very intro stage into photography back then. So it'd be a lot easier to just cut down the tree, strip the bark away from it, and ship it to places all over the world and show them these grand exhibit halls. So this picture you're going to see in a moment here, it's not technically of this giant sequoia. This happened to one other tree in the park. No connectivity there, so I'm showing it here. But this is of a giant sequoia reassembled with its bark in the Crystal Palace in London. Now, overall, this was a very bad thing to happen to these trees. Of course, it killed them. But there's a tiny bit of silver lining. I like to cling on to that a little bit, because a lot of people were upset that these trees were killed, and it did spark the movement to protect them. And because these trees were shipped all over the world, that means more and more people got to know them and wanted to see them, and they got more and more protected, more interest there was. So there's a little bit of benefit there. And it's only a benefit because we've learned from our past, right? We've learned this is bad, let's protect them instead. And that's one of the reasons why we're a state park, and we have been since 1931. And learning from our past mistakes is a good lesson for climate change overall, right? I told you about how I want you to help out climate change. I'm sharing the results of what you all said. You all said yes, which I really do appreciate. So history and mistakes being made is okay as long as you learn from them. And science is always cool, so it's fun to learn about that as well. All right. So this is the official end of my program. I would take us on top of the stump, but the past like 7 times I've done that so far this week, I've lost connectivity. So maybe we'll do it at the very end where it might not matter so much. But now is when I'm going to answer some questions. Now I see I have a ton in the Q&A right now. I'll do my best to try to condense them and like incorporate all of them. Probably not going to happen, but I will do my best. So if you've been holding on to your question, go ahead and put it in there now. I'm starting at the bottom. Some people are saying you had to sign off. Go for it. That's okay. You had to sign up. So go ahead and put your question in the chat. All right, I have a question about the roots. How deep and big are the roots? Great question. If we had more time, I would have mentioned them as well. So I'm going to talk about them now. Giant sequoia roots don't go very deep, actually. They don't care as much about that. They care more about them spreading pretty far across. If you think about a tower, it needs to have a pretty big base. So like lots of towers have kind of a triangular shape, like the Eiffel Tower in Paris is a great example of that. So the giant sequoias have a really big root system to keep them in place, and it can stretch 250 feet across. So it can be very, very wide. Now they can't be the best at everything. There's just not enough energy to do that. I'm sure you feel the same way. You can't be the best at everything. You just don't have the capacity for it. So they've traded off going deep in the soil with spreading far. That being said, they can go down about 5 feet. That's about the average, which sounds deep, but if you know other plants and other depths, some plants go down more than 20 feet. So 5 is actually in the shallow end. And I mentioned I want you to leave the cones in the forest. I also want you to stay on trails, like I'm on a trail right now. Because if you go off the trail, when you step onto the soil, it squishes down the dirt. So that's really hard to get water in there. And you might be potentially standing on giant sequoia roots, which is not good. So stay on the trail or any sort of path you might see, and then you'll help out giant sequoias and roots and animals overall. Okay, let's get to some more questions. How old is the discovery tree when it was cut down? Great question. It was 1,244 years old. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick and show you a picture of the inside of a tree in case you're curious for how we can know that. If you cut down a tree, which we don't suggest unless the tree is dead, this one was dead when it was cut down, you can count the rings. And I'm zooming in right now, you can see some lines. Each line represents about a year. So you count them and then you get the age of the tree. Some scientists can drill a very thin hole into a tree, take it out like that, and then count them that way. It's a pretty good way to do it to keep the tree alive. Giant sequoias are so big though, it's almost impossible to do it this way. There's just no tools big enough for it. So they don't count the tree rings for giant sequoias unless they've been cut down. All right, see a couple questions about this location in particular. So I mentioned we've been in state park since 1931, but people have been coming to see these giant sequoias since this tree was cut down, 1853. And a hotel was actually established here just a couple years later. So technically, this forest has been the longest running tourist attraction in California. So it was a resort with a hotel and then eventually became a state park. It's kind of cool. I see a couple questions about cutting down this tree. This is highly illegal at this point. You cannot cut down a giant sequoia this big or this old. All the really big old giant sequoias are protected. And actually, technically, giant sequoias are an endangered species. So you can have a giant sequoia, like there are giant sequoia tree farms where you can buy a giant sequoia tree, but they had to do all these permits and things in order to establish their tree farm and various permits to like cut down those trees for whatever reason. All the really big old ones that are thousands of years old, they are very protected, highly legal to do anything to them. You have to be very well trained to even do things like prescribe burns with these trees. Okay. Also have questions about, can you climb it? Can I climb it? Absolutely not. But there are people who study the very tops of the trees called canopy scientists. So if we just go up to the top of these trees here, we have all those branches you can see. They have this special crossbow where they'll shoot an arrow to wrap around the branch of a tree they're going to climb. And then they use their pure muscle, it's very impressive, to hoist themselves up to the very tops of the trees. It's pretty cool. We've had a couple canopy scientists come here this spring, and it was impressive. All right, I'm going to answer a few more that I do need to get going. And again, I can't answer quite all of these, but I'm answering some. All right, I have a couple questions about the animals, so I'll kind of keep it broad. I kind of gave you a quick bullet list of what animals lived here. I see a couple questions about bears. We do have black bears here. We don't have brown bears. Brown bears are what's on our patch. We used to have brown bears in California. They're also called grizzly bears. But unfortunately, when all that gold mining was happening, people were killing these bears for meat and out of fear and out of sport, such that there are no more grizzly bears in California. Unfortunately, we only have black bears. And they do live here. They don't climb up giant sequoias per se, but they can climb up other trees. Giant sequoias are just too tall for them. And overall, they're not really an issue because people have been very responsible about putting their food away when they're not eating them. So bears aren't harassing the people here, which is very good. You have to be respectful of bears, give them their space, don't leave out food for them. And I'll answer one last question. Again, sorry I can't get to everybody. But someone asked about the difference between these trees and coast redwoods. So this is the only state park that has giant sequoias. If you've seen a different sort of ports program, you saw a coast redwood, but they're very similar, right? They're siblings. Coast redwoods are only found on the California coast. So let me bring up my Google map again. And it makes sense. Coast redwood, coast, it fits. And I say California coast, technically they can go a little bit into Oregon. So giant sequoias are only in the midpoint of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So this is giant sequoia. And then I'll make coast redwoods a green color. Coast redwoods are found like right along the coast down like here. But they're pretty strict about where they like to live. So there's no natural overlap. A couple parks have both of them planted, but usually one of them isn't looking so great. We don't really have a coast redwood here. There are a couple parks along the coast that have a giant sequoia. That's probably not going to do very well because they like snow. They don't really like the fog. All right, that's the last question I'm going to take. Unfortunately, I do need to get going, but thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you had a good time. I'm going to take us on top of this stump here so you can hopefully see it. I might lose connectivity. So that's why I'm doing this at the very end. I do want to say, as I'm coming over here, if you come visit this park, we accept the 4th grade adventure pass. So if a fourth grader, look it up and you might be able to, or not might, you will be able to visit this park for free. You have to do a quick little application. And if you're not a fourth grader, we also accept the library pass. So you can go to your local public library, check out a day pass. That's good for all state parks, and you can enter for free. Looks like you're still with me, which is good. So I have this camera on one side, we walk to the other, and you can get a sense for just how big this tree is, right? 25 feet across. So thank you again for joining me. My name is Lily. And if you do come visit Calaveras Big Tree State Park, I'd love to give you a hello. So feel free to do ask for me. And hopefully I'll see you here sometime. Not, thank you for joining me virtually. Farewell, everybody.